A misty spring morning on the Thorpe Park Lake. A boat carrying the Princess of Wales, the Princes William and Harry, plus 2 friends and 4 detectives, heads towards the landing stage. It's their 3rd visit to this theme park on the west side of London, and expectations are high. As they pull up to the jetty and take off their life vests, they're all anticipating an exciting day, enjoying the white-knuckle thrills of the park, which attracts more than 1 million visitors each year. With the jackets off, it's just a short walk to the rides. Thorpe Park, situated just a few miles from the River Thames, had been a favourite of the Princess and her sons since they first visited it in 1991. Water and the chance to watch other people get wet is the main theme of the park and proves an irresistible draw to youngsters, even those who are 2nd and 3rd in line to the British throne. It's geared unashamedly to the young family market. It's also just a few miles from the royal family's country retreat at Windsor Castle. This visit was particularly important for the princess. Just a few months earlier, she and her husband, the Prince of Wales, had formally announced their separation. It came after 11 years of increasingly strained relations with the royal family. But one thing was never in any doubt: their joint commitment to their 2 young sons. With both boys at boarding school, the princess trod an increasingly lonely path, fulfilling a busy list of international engagements. So she particularly relished the opportunity to have a relaxed family day out, just like any other mother, with her 2 lively sons. It was a bit of a walk from the boat, but first on the agenda to get things warmed up was the flying fish ride. The 2 princes took prime position in the front seats, with detectives following behind. The princess decided to sit this one out and stayed with the 2 other young members of the party: 8-year-old Alexander Burrell and his 5-year-old brother Nicholas, both sons of her personal footman. As the roller coaster hurtled round them at speeds of up to 30 miles an hour, the princess shared a joke with Detective Ken Worf. With the adults ignoring him, young Nicholas was starting to get impatient. Finally, it was over. And as members of the public barged past them, most totally oblivious to the royal presence, it was a case of one ride down, what's next? And the answer was the teacup ride. Not everyone's cup of tea. It's a whirling, swirling ride guaranteed to make you dizzy. The princess had insisted that their party should queue up, even if it meant waiting their turn for a popular ride with everybody else. Not always an easy thing to do when you have one of the most famous faces in the world. Casually dressed in a leather jacket, not everyone recognized her. But a few did, and the park's general manager at the time, Colin Dawson, was on hand to smooth things out if it got a bit embarrassing. Diana may have been recognized, but she purposely stood well away from her sons. And they got away with it, looking just like any other children waiting for the queue to finally move. Dressed like ordinary youngsters, ignored by the crowd around them, it was an important experience for the two boys, then aged 10 and 8. A far cry from the formality of Balmoral or the Goldfish Bowl of state occasions, it was a rare opportunity for a boy who might one day be king to mingle with ordinary people. Colin Dawson decided to get things moving. Finally, there was the chance for the ride, and they all looked very relieved. As it got underway, Prince Harry's hat was removed. A mother's hand patted down his obstinate hair. Before long, teapot, teacups, saucers, and their occupants were on the move. Detectives in one cup, royals in another. Everyone had a rare old time, especially Prince William, who was really getting into the spirit of things. As the teacups whirled, Diana and the princes seemed in their element. Day trippers looked on, totally amazed that the heirs to the House of Windsor, the most famous royal family in the world, were there in front of their eyes, laughing, joking, larking around, just like any other excited youngsters on a day out with their mother. By now, more and more people were becoming aware of the VIP presence. But it didn't seem to worry Diana, who was determined to let the boys get as close as possible to the lives of ordinary people. Next stop was Thunder River, Thorpe Park's version of whitewater rafting. It may not be the biggest theme park in the world, but it specializes in water. As befits a complex built around a series of flooded gravel pits, there's water everywhere. And many of its rides are designed to ensure that the participants get thoroughly drenched. Thunder River comes into this category. The giant circular boats may look relaxing enough, but the swirling currents will spin them around, push them against the rocks, and give the occupants a splashing. The boys had taken up the offer of protective plastic covers, but Diana braved the elements in her trusty leather jacket. It proved so popular that they did a second circuit. By now, the princess was really getting into the party mood. There were smiles for the onlookers, and she strode on purposefully to the next ride. As the royal party wandered casually around the shops and various attractions at the park, a jazz band played a tribute to the princess. Diana had tried to ensure that the two princes would see something of an ordinary childhood, away from the stiff confines of palace life and the people that surround it. The innocent pleasures of a local leisure park may seem trivial, but to Diana, who was moulding a future king, they were supremely important. She felt it essential that William and his brother Harry should get a taste of the lifestyle of other children. And then, with a Canadian theme, it was on to the most famous ride at Thorpe Park, the Loggers' Leap. It boasts one of the highest plunges in Britain and is not for the nervous. It had proved particularly popular with the boys on their two previous visits and was a key item in the programme. It's another ride where water plays an unavoidable part. The boats drop at high speed down 50 feet into a water trough below. The boys and their mother particularly relished the plunge and seemed even more delighted by the plight of the water-sodden detectives following on behind. It proved so popular that they had a second go. And Harry was game for even more. the company of her beloved sons, enjoying the harmless thrills of a leisure park, Diana seemed in her element. Drenched to the skin, she was a million miles away from her glamorous cover girl image. Next item on the agenda, for the boys and the detectives at least, was a boat race. And the princess took up a position viewing from the sidelines. The jumbo pedalows, called the Hudson River Rafters, are modelled on the old Canadian lumberjack rafts. Thorpe Park warns participants that they are hard work on the legs. As the youngest boy stayed on shore with the princess, the others split up and each shared a boat with an adult. It looked as if the detectives were going to do a bit of hard pedaling. With words of encouragement from Diana, they got into position for the start. Pedal boat racing is not a natural spectator sport, even if you are mother to two of the competitors. But at least the Princess of Wales had Nicholas to keep her company. Eventually, the race got underway. Colin Dawson, using a bit of managerial influence, commandeered a motor launch to give a helping hand. They all looked exhausted, but Detective Ken Wharf, a firm favourite of Diana and the boys, had time for a brief exchange with the photographers.
You want to try this, Jim?
Well, thank you, Ken. Looks too energetic for me.
Can I borrow your flies, Ken? Good.
You're the runner, Ian. You're the runner.
No wonder it's closed to the public. It's dangerous to your health, this.
The final ride of the day was the depth charge. Inflatable rafts with 1 or 2 people on board hurtle 40 feet at high speed down a water chute. It's yet another opportunity to get wet. The princess shared a raft with Prince Harry and seemed to pose happily at the end of her ride for the handful of royal photographers. By this time, a small crowd had gathered to watch the royal activity. On with Harry's hat, which Diana had been keeping in her jacket. And then more smiles as the rest of the party came down the chutes. The crowd was getting more enthusiastic as news of the royal presence spread through the park. Thorpe Park had presented the youngsters with water guns, and much to the princess's delight, Detective Ken was the target.
Ian? Ian?
Even Prince William got in on the act as they headed off for lunch. Finally, the visit was over. By now, it was getting a little nippy, but they all seemed relaxed and happy as they headed off through the crowds towards the exit. Young Nicholas was exhausted. It had been a long day for a 5-year-old, but the princess gave him a piggyback as they made their way across the exit bridge. A memory for him to treasure. It was to be a final visit to Thorpe Park. The princes were growing up, and the delights of the alpine ski slopes, whitewater rafting in Colorado, and 1,000,001 other exotic holidays were beckoning. But for Thorpe Park, it had been a great success. Colin Dawson.
I think they thoroughly enjoyed themselves. It's the third time they've been here in 3 years. We put a programme together that we know they would enjoy from previous experience, so we included all their favourites. And their favourites, of course, they always do twice. Things like Loggers Leap, Thunder River. So I think, yeah, another successful visit. We thoroughly enjoyed having them here.
Did they say anything at all about the visit?
They said, thank you very much, we've had a great time, as always, and thank you for putting such a nice programme together. And we said it was a fairly simple thing to do when you know the things that people enjoy doing.
And they seem to mingle quite happily amongst the other guests.
They're very relaxed with our visitors. That's been the experience on the 2 previous occasions when they've been here. They're quite happy being and queuing and enjoying that and talking to the people. People are quite surprised to find themselves alongside royalty in the queue, but it's quite amazing how adaptable people are, and they just chat quite normally.
And they managed to get wet.
They got very wet, as we all did. I think we got particularly wet today, and I'm not quite sure why that happened. I think we noticed it more because the weather this year wasn't quite as warm as it has been on their 2 previous visits, but still a lot of fun.
Then in 1997, tragedy struck. Along with many other centres of entertainment, Thorpe Park closed its doors on the day of the funeral. It was estimated that 2.5 billion people watched the funeral on television, 25 million in Britain alone. The whole complex, which had been the scene of so many happy moments for Diana and her sons, was eerily quiet. A boat which bore her name stood unused. The park, which 4 years earlier had echoed to the sound of royal laughter, was deserted and empty, as if in silent tribute to one of its favourite patrons.